ready?
We're ready.
Okay. I want to give a disclaimer before we get started. We'll be talking about suicide and mental health crises. So if you get overwhelmed or triggered,
remember we're old and we need talk up.
Okay. So if you get overwhelmed or triggered by what we're talking about, feel free to leave the room or, do whatever you need to do to avoid it escalating further. So now that I've said that, hi, my name is Jillian. I'm the affiliate leader of NAMI Golden Triangle. And NAMI, or National Alliance on Mental Illnesses, is a nationwide grassroots organization dedicated to improving the quality of life of all individuals living with a mental health condition and their families through education, support, and advocacy. NAMI has different chapters all over the country, and NAMI Golden Triangle is just a small part of that. The vision of NAMI Golden Triangle is to ensure acceptance of and treatment for all those with a mental health condition and to facilitate their recovery. Having a mental illness and a mental health crisis are two different things. So tonight we'll be talking about mental health crises. So people with mental illness can have a mental health crisis, but so can anybody else. So yeah, there's two different things. So
sometimes we think they're the same, huh?
Right, yeah, so lots of things blend together.
So you can be not mentally ill and have a mental health crisis, just...
Right.
That explains it.
Uh-oh.
Right? Yeah. I was talking about me, not my wife.
That's good to clarify.
Yeah, I've learned after almost 40 years, so yeah. I'm sorry, I won't interrupt no more.
Oh,
Yes, I'm sure he probably will.
Yes, he will. So a mental health crisis is any situation in which a person's behavior puts them at risk of hurting themselves or others and prevents them from being able to take care of themselves and function regularly in a society. So a risk of suicide is a major concern for people having a mental health crisis. Encouraging someone to get help when you notice these things is a very important first step towards safety. Most of what we'll be talking about is from a NAMI resource guide that I have available on flash drives for free, right over there. So if you want to get with me afterwards, I can.
She's got flash drives.
I do, fancy flash drives. They're blue.
Oh.
Yes. So many things can lead to a mental health crisis. Changes in home life, school, work can all lead to a mental health crisis. A predisposition in genetics and experiencing trauma, especially at a young age, can also impact having a mental health crisis. It's important to know that warning signs are not always easy to detect when a mental health crisis is developing. Common actions that may be a clue that a mental health crisis is developing are inability to perform daily tasks, rapid mood swings, increased agitation, abusive behavior to self and others, social isolation, losing touch with reality, and paranoia. If you think a loved one is struggling with suicidal thoughts, some more warning signs to watch out for are giving away personal possessions, talking as if they're saying goodbye or going away forever, taking steps to tie up loose ends, preoccupation with death, sudden cheerfulness or calm after a period of extremely low mood, dramatic changes in behavior, mood, and personality, increased drug or alcohol use, withdrawing from friends, family, normal activities, a sense of utter hopelessness and helplessness, and history of suicide attempts themselves or self-harming behaviors, or history of family or friend suicide or suicide attempts as well. Details are very important. For example, being aware of how long the changes in personality or daily functioning and how much difficulty they're causing can be very helpful for the healthcare professionals to know when they become involved with the situation. So staying and being aware of details are very important. If you notice any of the signs we talked about, or if you're concerned with someone about suicide, don't be afraid to talk to them. They're not some, they're still human. We're all human, just they may be struggling with suicide.
So we need to just come out and ask them, hey?
So that's what, yes. So just start the conversation. One way of starting the conversation is by sharing specific signs that you've noticed, like, hey, I've noticed lately that you haven't been sleeping, aren't aren't interested in social activities you used to enjoy, or are posting a lot of sad stuff online. Just different behavior that just kind of points little signs that like normally you wouldn't be aware of, but with this information and kind of knowing that the person is like going through some hard times or whatever, you can be aware of this because these are small signs that point to a mental health crisis developing. So
Awareness is the big thing.
right, yes, just being aware. And if you're educated beforehand, then it's way easier and less likely that the mental health crisis will develop into something so big. If you can catch it ahead of time with all these
And then
signs.
you can process it.
Right, yes, definitely.
So early intervention, God being
Yes,
aware.
definitely, that makes a huge difference. So if you think that a person or yourself is struggling with suicide or suicidal thoughts, call a therapist, psychiatrist, or other healthcare professional who's been working with the individual and knows their history. If they do not have a healthcare professional, which that's very common as well, or they used to have one and they don't currently, just offer to help them find one. It's not very hard to do. And if for some reason you feel like you personally can't like find anybody in your area or that accepts your insurance or whatever, feel free to reach out and contact me or NAMI Golden Triangle, and we can definitely help you do that. That's half of the emails I reply to is helping people try to find resources, yes.
And then they do have resources if you don't have insurance.
Yes,
because
yes.
Insurance is a big deal.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, you just have to know that there are options out there, even though you might not necessarily see them. So that's why we're here to kind of help you and like point you in the right direction.
Right.
So.
Right. It's good to know.
So if possible, once you notice these things, remove potential means like weapons and medications. If needed, call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. They're very helpful. Or call 911. Be sure to listen, express concern, and reassure. Focus on being understanding, caring, and non-judgmental. No one likes to feel like they're being judged by how they're feeling. So you can say things like, you're not alone, I'm here for you. I may not be able to understand exactly how you feel, but I care about you and want to help. That's a big one. Admitting that you don't necessarily know what that person is exactly going through, that's okay. But admitting that and then standing there and not leaving is like a huge deal and helps a lot. So, yes, having these conversations can be very hard and scary, but that does not mean we should not be having them. Take a deep breath and try to stay calm. These conversations are very important and can definitely save lives, for sure. What not to do? Don't promise secrecy or debate the value of living. Don't try to handle the situation by yourself. Don't ask in a way that indicates you want no for an answer. Like, you're not thinking of suicide, are you? It's just not the best way to handle things. Also avoid saying things like, it's all in your head, just snap out of it. Or we all go through tough times, suck it up. Just get through it, that type of thing. Please remember, a suicide threat or attempt is a medical emergency requiring professional help as soon as possible. A lot of people say that suicidal people are just seeking attention. I've heard that personally a lot, but that's not necessarily true. It can take a lot of courage to speak up about this type of thing because there's a lot of stigma around it. And just for argument's sake, let's say they are just doing it to seek attention. If they're going to this much of an extreme to seek attention, maybe they need some of it, and maybe they need help, both professionally and from a help and support system in their community.
Absolutely.
We have to weigh the risk of not taking them seriously. Is it worth it?
It's kind of like them reaching out to you.
Right.
Right, okay.
Definitely. So if you're worried that you or a loved one is in a crisis or nearing a crisis, don't be afraid to seek help. Be sure to assess the urgency of the situation to determine where to start or who to call. Good questions to ask yourselves are, is the person in danger of hurting themselves, others, or property? Do you need emergency assistance? Do you have time to start with a phone call for guidance and support from a mental health professional? A person experiencing a mental health crisis can't always communicate their thoughts or feelings, needs, or emotions. They may also find it difficult to understand what others are saying. They can hear you, depending on the person, but a lot of times they can't hear you and they're kind of aware of what's going on, but they have so much emotional turmoil going on inside their head, they can't really process what you're saying to them, if that makes sense. So just be aware of that and try to empathize and connect with the person's feelings. Try to de-escalate the crisis. Some good de-escalation tips are keep your voice calm, avoid overreacting, listen, express concern and support, avoid continuous eye contact. That's kind of a random one, but if you think about it, it can be very
intimidating.
Yes, intimidating and demanding.
Yes, and they're already in a crisis.
Yes, exactly. So just try to be as calm and just your mannerisms and everything, just gentle. You're there to help and you care about them instead of trying to fix the situation, because you may not be able to fix the situation, but you can be there to help and support. So offer options instead of trying to take control. Avoid touching the person unless you ask for permission. Be patient. Gently announce actions before initiating them. That might seem a little silly, I guess, to some people, but it's just a good precaution and it just helps them. It's not gonna hurt if you gently announce your actions, hey, I'm gonna go do this.
It's like keeping good boundaries, not being invasive.
Right, exactly. Just, being aware of the other person and realize that they're going through a lot, and this is one of the ways that you can try to help them. If you can't de-escalate the crisis yourself, you can seek additional help from mental health professionals who can assess the situation and determine the level of crisis intervention required. So feel free to contact any of them. If there doesn't seem to be any immediate danger, call a psychiatrist, clinic nurse, therapist, case manager, family physician, anybody who has any kind of medical experience at all with that person so they can help. It's better to have someone that knows their history so you don't have to start from scratch. But if you have to start from scratch, that is okay. It's an option. It's just better if they already know the history. It takes less time. If you can't reach someone and the situation is worsening, consider call 911. Once you call 911, there are two entities that may become involved: medical first responders and law enforcement. You need to be prepared for both. If the situation can't be resolved on site or it's recommended by first responders or law enforcement, taking your loved one to an emergency room may be the best option. Be aware that if they are transported in a law enforcement vehicle, the usual policy is to use handcuffs. This can be very upsetting for everyone involved, but it may be the only option you have at the time. I'm not a huge fan of that. We're working towards trying to make...
Seemed like it would make it escalate.
Right. We're working towards trying to have a CIT. I'm actually working a crisis intervention team that's for this type of situation specifically. We don't have one that I'm aware of, but I know that Houston does. And I've been to a couple of conferences there, and they seem like we had actual, I think the sheriff and a couple of the officers were there and talked about how much money it saved, how practical it is to have a CIT. And so I think it's a really good option to have, and we can benefit as a community from that. So I am personally working towards setting one up for our area.
I have a question, please. Say somebody is having an episode of crisis, and you're trying to calm them down, and you can't get a way to call for help. Because if you call for help, then it could make them escalate even worse.
Right.
What do you do in that kind of situation?
It really depends on, it's because each specific situation is so different from one another. So kind of use your best judgment, but depending on if there's danger, like if they are like actively trying to hurt themselves, do as much as possible to call 911. So, does that make sense? Like,
It does. Well, I had a gentleman have an accident in my driveway one day,
okay.
and he ran his car into my culvert. Well, come to find out, at the end of it all, he would get up to go to walk, and he literally would pass out. I'm talking, he busted his nose. I thought he was on drugs, but every time I would try to call for help, he would freak out even worse. And come to find out what it was he had taken his blood pressure medicine, and his blood pressure came down too low, and it was causing him to have a crisis.
Right.
And he was paranoid about people driving by.
Right.
So every time I'd go to grab my phone, he would freak out on me. That's why I was asking, and I didn't want to leave him alone.
Right, yeah, it's very difficult.
And I didn't know none of his history. I didn't even know his name.
Right, yeah.
No, that's serious.
So that's why I'm asking,
Right.
because I was put in a situation
Right, yeah,
like
that's
that.
definitely hard. Try to, like we were saying earlier, try to connect with the person's feelings, kind of like try to talk them down a little bit, try to remain as calm as possible, and try to get them to stay calm. And if they can reach a certain level where they are like able to talk to you in normal sentences and kind of like they're visibly a little bit more calm than they were, depending on once you find out if it's like actual medical problem, you can get them, they can go get their medicine or call the hospital, whatever. It's very hard. It's really hard.
It is. That's why I was asking the
there is
question.
no like, just do this and everything's fine. And so, yeah, that is really hard.
Each case is different. In that situation, it'd be a 911 regardless of the fact
I
that
hollered at my mom when he passed out at one point. I just hollered at her. She was on
Yeah.
the porch, 911.
Yeah.
And she got on the
That's
phone,
good.
and that's how we got dispatched.
Yeah, that's probably,
But I was wondering if there wasn't mental illness along with the other.
There may have been,
Well,
because he was so paranoid.
right, yes, definitely.
You gotta think about it, if you would've known it was blood sugar, you would've, or
I
blood
would
weight.
have, blood pressure, I would
Right.
have done something different,
Right.
but I didn't know
Exactly.
the person.
Exactly.
I had no clue what was going on, period.
Right. Yeah, it's very hard. Like I said, they don't have to have a mental illness to have a mental health crisis. So, yeah, that's.
And when somebody would stop on the road, he would get more paranoid.
Right.
They're staring at me, they're watching me, and he would escalate really bad.
Right.
And I was just kind of like sitting in the ditch with him and
Right.
trying
Yeah,
to
that's good.
calm him down.
You did good.
Yeah, definitely.
He
We
may
ended
have
up
had a
getting
head
help.
trauma. He may have had a head trauma too.
He wouldn't leave with the ambulance, so
Mhm.
he never would let them take him.
What ended up happening?
Some people from down the road, actually, I got on the phone, I got his phone, and I found a phone number that was his mom. I called her, and then I called where he was going. I knew them people, and that guy walked about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from his place to my house to come and get him, and then they got him in the car.
And that was
drove him
smart.
off. But the problem at that point was the law showed up, and he told the law that he had a trunk full of weapons. The law went over there, and he had a trunk full of guns.
Oh.
So that really
Right.
escalated my
Definitely.
crisis at that point.
That's a mental health crisis there.
Wait a minute here, now I'm freaking out.
Yeah.
And then we called 911 on you, huh?
Woo! But yeah, they
Yes.
finally got him calmed down, but they found out that his blood pressure, he had high blood pressure, and he just automatically took his medicine without checking it, and it went too low, and every time he would stand up.
There's some mental health there.
I think so too.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to decide what the best thing to do in that situation is.
That's like,
And the house he was
Worst
going
case
to
scenario.
was a drug person,
There
so
you have it.
my first thing was, he's on drugs already, when he said the guy's name. I'm like, okay, he's a drug addict.
Yeah, that's definitely hard.
So,
it does sound like drugs.
Okay, so Jillian, she did good, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, you know, what
He's
else?
alive, isn't he?
I guess,
I
I
had
haven't
to
seen
sit
anything
there.
really.
Yeah, I think you did the best. That's what I would have done. Try to stay calm, talk him down. taking the person to an emergency room, be prepared for that emergency room visit to last several hours. It's a very long process.
Even a day.
It could be 10,
It
12,
could be 24
15
hours.
Yes,
You
yes.
ever worked for Fannin for how many years?
Oh,
Just psychiatric
13
nurse.
years.
Wow, wow.
For how many years?
13.
Yeah.
But I've been in nursery.
And when we put kids in Fannin, by how long would you be there?
Huh? Yeah.
12 hours to 2 days sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely takes a while. If the person has no history of violent acts, make sure to mention this to the nurses or officers, whoever's involved. Share the facts efficiently and objectively, and let the officer decide the course of action if you do end up calling 911. And remember, once you have called 911 and officers arrive on the scene, you do not control the situation anymore. They do.
Which is a relief, I'm sure.
Right, yes, a lot of times, if you aren't equipped to handle the situation, don't be afraid to call 911 and let them handle it. So, yes.
And NAMI works with police.
Yes,
I was reading all about that.
Yes.
They are real big.
and we're trying to get more, NAMI Golden Triangle specifically is trying to get more involved as well and educate more, to be as efficient as possible and to benefit everyone, especially people with mental illnesses.
Well, then you don't know because there's so much drugs involved and
Right.
you have so much of that where you don't know if it's meth or if they're having a mental health crisis.
Exactly, yeah, and a lot of times officers don't know, and so they have to make a 2-second decision. And,
Yes.
yeah, so, but with CIT, like I mentioned earlier, that will educate them more on, and give them more options on what to do in that situation.
Absolutely.
So I'm very excited about setting that up.
That sounds
for
great.
sure. You can request that the officers view the situation as a mental health crisis instead of just as criminal acts going on. And if your loved one is not admitted to treatment and the situation worsens, don't be afraid to call for help again. The situation can be reassessed and your loved one may meet the criteria for hospital admission later, even though they originally did not. When calling 911 for a mental health emergency, remember to remain calm and explain that your loved one is not a criminal and is having a mental health crisis. First responders will ask your name, the person's name, age, and description, the person's location, whether the person has a weapon or not. Information you may also need to communicate is mental health history, diagnosis, medications, current and discontinued. They may be on mental health medications are kind of
Yeah,
hard.
they're tricky.
Yes, they're very tricky, and they can have lots of weird side effects that you would not even think of. And if a person used to be on it, it may still be in their system. So discontinued medications.
Or they may have decided to quit taking it.
Exactly.
And that's why you're in a mental health crisis.
Exactly, that happens a lot. A lot of times, people with mental illnesses, because they're taking medication, start to feel better and have less symptoms. And so they're like, oh, okay, I don't need to take this medication anymore. And then they stop taking the medication, and then all the symptoms come back. And it gets really bad because you're messing with your brain chemicals, which is not the best thing in the world to mess with. So, but yeah, that does happen a lot. A lot of people stop taking their medications.
Or they're on drugs or alcohol.
Right, exactly.
They want to do the
Self-medicate.
alcohol so they quit taking the medicine so they can do the alcohol.
Exactly.
So
Or
then
they're
they
doing the whole
really
combination.
Right, or they're doing both. Yeah, which
Yeah.
also isn't good. Yeah, there's a whole mess.
It is a mess. I have a friend that's a nurse that has a daughter that's grown, and she literally, the girl is almost 50, and she does her psychotropic meds for her because it's a mess. It's
Yes,
a mess.
it
If
is.
she doesn't administer it and keep it locked up with the alcohol and everything else,
Right.
it's
Definitely.
crisis constantly.
Yes, definitely. Also communicate to the mental health professionals involved and the officers the medications, like I said, suicide attempts and current threats, prior violence and current threats, drug use, contributing factors like, they're having like a lot of work stress lately, or their school environment has changed. Schools, public schools especially, have been having a lot of stress on them lately. So that can be a big contributing factor to a mental health crisis. If they have any past trauma or any delusions or hallucinations or loss of touch with reality, those are all good things to talk about if they have experienced them with the officers and mental health professionals. If you don't feel safe, leave the location immediately. Don't be afraid to do that, and then call 911 and let them handle it. Don't be afraid to do that, because if you are not prepared to handle the situation, or you don't feel safe, trust your instincts. If you don't feel safe, leave.
Yeah, because they could be delusional.
Right, exactly. And, you may want to help them, but you may not be able to. You might have to let someone else do that, so don't be afraid to do that as well.
Well, you don't know what their strength is when they're.
Right.
They could have a trunk full of weapons.
Right.
Yeah, right. I've dealings with people that have extra strength when they're on different drugs or whatever.
Yeah, danger.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So if you do feel safe staying with your loved one until help arrives, announce all of your actions in advance. Use short sentences. Be comfortable with silence. That's a big one. Allow your loved one to move around freely. Don't make them go sit in the corner until help arrives. They're a person. Most of the time, a grown adult. If you're dealing with a kid, adjust accordingly. But they're a human being. Let them move around a little bit. So reduce stimulation from TV, bright lights, loud noises. This isn't necessarily a catch-all. Don't just turn off all the lights and let them sit there. It might be helpful to have on the TV, to let them focus on that and not have to worry about what's going on around them. It really just depends on the person and the situation. Also, don't disagree with the person's experience. They're experiencing a different reality than you are, and be aware of that. No one wants to worry about the possibility of a crisis, but it can't be avoided sometimes. It's rare that a person suddenly loses control of their thoughts or feelings and behavior. General behavior changes often occur before a crisis, so don't ignore those changes and talk with your loved one and encourage them to visit their doctor or nurse practitioner. The more symptomatic your loved one becomes, the more difficult it may be to convince them to seek treatment. If you feel like something isn't right, voice your concern, talk to them. If necessary, take actions to get services for them and support for yourself. Don't be afraid to reach out. And if for some reason you reach out and you don't get an answer or they don't want to help you, reach out to somebody else. Because there are people out there who just don't get it. And so, but
you have poor medical, you have
Right.
some poor medical
exactly.
help out there. That's not that good.
Yeah, just know that if you do run into that, they're not all like that. So there is help out there. It's very annoying and frustrating if you run into someone like that, but keep pushing and keep trying. Be patient.
And some of the frustration is always push, number one, number two, number three. We're not in the office today. That's the biggest frustration when you're in those situations.
Definitely. Yeah, it's very hard to deal with that. So, when a mental health crisis begins, it's likely that the individual is unaware of the impact of their behavior. So be sure to discuss with others in the household how to stay safe during the crisis. And even if they aren't necessarily in danger, it might be best for everyone, emotionally speaking, if the children stay in their rooms while this is happening or whatever. Like I said, use your best judgment on what to do in these situations. Try to learn all you can about the illness your loved one has, if they do have a mental illness or any illness, maybe physical things that they're taking medications for that could affect brain chemistry and stuff like that. It could lead to a mental health crisis. So just try to educate yourself on what's going on with the other person. And remember that other family members are also affected, so keep lines of communication open by talking with each other. Avoid assigning guilt and blame to others or yourself. It's not helpful to do so, and the illness is no one's fault. Learn to recognize early warning signs of relapse, such as changes in sleep patterns, increasing social withdrawal, inattention to hygiene, and skipping giving medications. Psychiatric advanced directives, PADs, also might be helpful. I'm not super familiar with these documents, but I did learn about them recently, and they seem to be, I don't have anyone personally that has used them, but they seem to be very helpful. They're legal documents that share a person's specific instructions or preferences regarding future mental health treatment. So they are used during a psychiatric emergency if the person loses their capacity to give or withhold informed consent to treatment. So you can find these documents online anywhere.
That's interesting, I've never heard that.
Right, me neither, but they seem like
That's good, that way you can
Right.
like intervene
Yes, definitely.
if you have that.
You don't have to worry about what would they want, because they, a lot of these things are like plan ahead, if you can. Sometimes you can't, and you just gotta,
Sometimes you just end up with a crisis, but
Right.
if you have a person in your home that is mentally ill, the more
Right.
educated you are, the more aware you are.
definitely. And the earlier you can catch it, the better it is for everyone involved. So I have a list of resources to call during a mental health crisis. So
It's great, we all need to have that on this time.
let me just pass it out. The ducks, there's a little ducky on here.
Yeah.
That is for our suicide prevention campaign NAMI Golden Triangle is doing, so that's why there's a duck on the card.
Okay.
Yes, the whole thing is, stay afloat, reasons to stay afloat.
She must have just made these. Hard to get more.
That's pretty much all I have, so. we
I do
any
have a
questions?
question.
Yeah, good.
Okay, and maybe this is just, maybe I'm looking for more of your opinion than an answer or whatever, but the culture and the society that we live in today, with the school shootings and, you don't know what people are gonna do and, everything, all that's wrapped up. So my question to you is like, what resources do we have as a society or culture that we can cut these things off before they happen? I mean, so many times, you go along just like the Uvalde, and she didn't see that her son was gonna, and so, but as we notice these things, do we have resources that we can rely on or talk to? So, because the thing that I'm talking is maintenance or whatever, or try to get it before it
Right.
escalates.
Right.
And they tell us that in foster care, hey, process with them, if you start seeing an escalation, process talk before it gets so far.
Yes.
Well, I'm just beginning to think we don't have anything, because you got all these people out here with all these signs and all this is going on. Before they go out and do something really super crazy, well, what resources do we have for that? To stop it, before it gets to the place where they are carrying the guns and doing that?
Right.
What kind of resources? What's your, I mean,
It really depends. It's a case-by-case basis for sure. But, did you get one? Okay, great. But just educating everyone involved, especially the child or, person. I feel like the main thing is to help educate the person on how to handle their emotions.
Absolutely, and families, like this thing with Uvalde, I told Bob this, I feel like the child was probably autistic, and probably on they're so used to him being withdrawn, so used to
Right.
him being fixated and going and doing his own thing, that because you just said, well, he has this condition, but nobody's really educated on it,
Right.
to see that he's further withdrawn,
Right.
or further, so it had to be really some things
so
going on.
you just get
before you
used
did
to that person's
Well, with him, it was a
behavior.
lot different. He
So you
wasn't
just let it
withdrawn
go?
until COVID. Then COVID came along.
Yeah,
and-
COVID did a lot.
And when the COVID hit, then he became withdrawn
Almost-
because
yeah.
he couldn't
Right.
get out.
I begin to think the whole world's going to die and it's the end of the world,
And
and
they said
they
other
become
than that,
that way.
he wasn't that way.
Right.
If that was an older grandmother, she was taking care of him, wasn't educated, and I guess he was what he was.
Or she just accepted him of how he was, and he just went overboard.
Because it is education.
Yes, definitely. I think a huge part of it is educating everyone involved, and also, like in this case, you know, the kids, educate the kid on how to handle their emotions and everything. That can be very hard to do, especially if they're like a teenager, and so they've already got some years in them. And if you try to teach them something, they may not necessarily accept it at first. So a lot of times with teenagers, it helps to have like an outside party talk to them.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, it's like Mom said it, I don't want to listen to that.
No, it's true.
She can be right. But, you know, like a therapist or like a trusted adult that is educated at least a little bit on mental health, I think that would help a lot. So just like educating themselves on how to deal with their emotions, and if possible to see a therapist. Everybody can benefit from seeing a therapist for sure. And having a support system is a huge part as well. So whether it's, you know, a small group at your church or like our connection support group we just started, NAMI Golden Triangle just started. It's for people with mental illnesses. And
That's
we
great.
meet once a month. Yep, and soon we will be having a family support group for family members and close friends, loved
That's
ones
great, too.
involved as well. So just having people around you who kind of understand, or at least are trying to understand and educate themselves, is a
I
huge
think
part.
this should be taught at schools too.
Yes, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say that earlier, but I
Because
forgot.
then that would make each student aware of other
Exactly.
students, plus the teachers would be educated.
Right, and
what
there
to
is
watch
stuff that I need to dig a little bit more on what NAMI offers exactly, but there is an option to where we can go into schools and have like an
That would be
assembly. And I'm
excellent.
very
Yeah, that would
interested.
be excellent.
I'm very interested in doing that, so I just need to do a little bit more research before I actually reach out to the schools just yet. But there is a program to do that with, and I definitely want to do that in the future, so I think that would be very
I'm glad that
beneficial.
You're on top of that and you're thinking about that, because I could just even see, I would love that here, just to have a support group for young people.
Right,
Not just at public schools, but private schools, Christian schools.
Yep.
Everybody struggles.
yeah,
You're not,
And it always-
nobody's above.
Yeah, and it always seems like when you have the gatherings, or, you know, where there's a gathering, which obviously is schools and stuff like that, but then let's say you have a band or something, or a festival or something, you know, where there's groups of people that person's gonna come in and try to make a show. Have you noticed since the shooting, you've all been and stuff, that all of a sudden on our news, on our phone, it just pops up, another one got shot here, you know, and then all of a sudden it's just like a disease that just,
yeah.
you know, it's like, you gotta be noticed that much.
And my big thing is autism, because autism is so prevalent now. We have so many autistic children that are withdrawn and isolated, and they're playing the games that are violent. That is the danger, and we got to draw those kids into seeing that there's other kids that are like them, and give them social things to do
Right.
together, and give them some hope. But that staying in their rooms fixated, I mean, that's dangerous, and I feel like that's what a lot of this is.
I think some of it's also being forced to take the vaccines for some of the students, that it could be causing some side effects. You never know. Because I'm gonna tell you, my daughter was the one sitting next to me. She was taking a medication. It was actually like, it was called the NuvaRing. It was for females, it inserted. She was having a chemical imbalance of her hormones. It caused her to actually become suicidal. The NuvaRing is like 85% suicide, causes suicidal.
Yeah, and a lot of
tendencies.
stuff that, especially in women, that affects hormones at all, is very common to develop depression.
Did not
Yes,
know that.
it is
On the
actually, for some reason,
Yes.
I know God was telling me, because I was sitting on the couch, because I just had the episode of her slicing her arms with a knife. And we had to call the law and all kinds of stuff, but something just told me, look up the side effects.
Right.
And when I looked it up, I told her right then and there, I said, you throw it in the garbage. You pull it out, you throw it in the garbage, get rid of all of them. And once she did that, we never had another episode.
Yeah, it's very common, sadly, yeah.
But
When it affects your
you would
hormones.
think doctors would be like, okay, if the statistics on this is so high, why would we even think about giving it to somebody?
Right, and honestly, some of the doctors don't know, or necessarily, they might know, but they don't care enough to really like have that in their mind when they're giving that out.
And they're not researching, they're listening.
Right.
What happens is they have all these drug reps that come in and they get all these perks, because I was in the medical field 20 years, they get all these perks. And so they go ahead and they get all these samples and they start using that sample.
Right.
And they haven't done
So,
the
like I
research.
said, they're not all like that. So if you run into somebody like that, just go find another one and keep trying. Like I really encourage you to keep trying.
Oh, she said after that, she wasn't doing no more nothing.
Right, yeah, and like I said earlier, like just being aware of all the medications they're on, not even necessarily ones that like directly affect brain chemistry, because a lot of different medications, because it messes with your body, everything's connected in your body, and a lot of times it like affects your brain chemistry and can cause anxiety and depression specifically. Those two are very common.
Absolutely.
So is there NAMI being taught in schools at all, anywhere?
Yes, they have assemblies. I'm not really sure.
We just don't have it here in our area yet.
Right, but I'm working on setting that up very
I
soon.
thought,
That's good.
I'm gonna tell you, my wife and I had thought about it, because the teacher, maybe particularly the school, but the teachers are not equipped to handle behavioral problems children.
Right,
You know,
With mental illness.
With mental illness,
Right.
and that's all we've done.
right.
And so, if they could get educated and say, well, this is why this child is acting this
Right.
way,
Right.
whether being autistic or bipolar or whatever, they would have a better way to equip themselves to handle it.
Right. And I think that
But they
generally
just
the
don't.
same thing goes with law enforcement as well. If you educate them on what to do, because
Yeah, that's
just
good.
as a general rule, when you first become like a police officer or a teacher, your first thought is not, I'm gonna like run in with people with mental illnesses. Like that's not their number one priority.
Right.
Their number one priority is for teachers to educate the general class, or as law enforcement, criminal activity and protecting and stuff like that. So to educate them specifically and help educate, like in schools, their peers. So if everyone kind of knows about it, the more likely they are to just be aware and, be preemptive about those kind of things. So yeah, definitely educating is a big part of
Yes,
that.
yes, absolutely.
Y'all statistics was really wild, because it said that nearly 15% of men and 30% of women booked into jails have a serious mental health condition.
And what did that say?
It says 15% of men and 30% of women.
Women more than men?
And then at least 83% of all jail inmates with a
Did you
mental
mean
illness
illness?
did not have
You knew I was gonna get that right.
access. But they didn't have access to needed treatment, and as a result, their conditions got worse.
Right, exactly. Or no access to medications or even therapists or
Yes.
anything like that. Insurance problems or just.
And then
where they
after
live.
leaving jail, if they don't get the help, they're right back in.
Well,
Yes,
and they go to jail, say they go to jail, their own medicine, they go to jail, they don't get the medicine.
Mhm.
They don't.
And
know-
many
they don't-
times they're
don't remember what they
self-medicated
are,
because
You
they're.
know, and they don't put them on it.
Well, let me tell you another horror story. So my wife and I, we've been doing foster care for a long, long time. But you got a child, I want to say this, you got a child that is been on this medication for a long, long time, and it's been changed, but all of a sudden they graduate, they get out of our house, they go out into the world, and a lot of them don't take that medicine no more.
Right. It's
They
a
just,
big
it just comes, I mean,
adjustment.
I called, what does that do to their brain?
It's rough.
It rubs.
Yeah, but it is especially, that's when they graduate high school and go to college, or just graduate high school, they that general slot of time and age is where a lot of mental illnesses come up, because there's such a dramatic change in their life. That's when it comes up a lot of
Yeah,
times.
well, and even schizophrenia.
Yes,
I mean,
that's
yes,
a big one for sure.
Just like, boom.
Yeah,
they
that's
split.
when 18 to 20 26, I think it is when a lot of people with like schizophrenia like develop it at that age.
Go to college and then flip.
Yes, because there's such a dramatic change in their lifestyle.
Yeah. You know, I talked to Dr. Weaver the other day, and we were talking, and he says that the human brain develops from the back to the front.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you know, I was talking about the foster kids that leave our home, what kind of condition they are when they leave our home, and they come back 4 or 5 years later, and they think Kim and I are the best people in the world. Oh my gosh, hi Daddy Bob, and he could have been 5 years of cussing us or swearing to us going out the door, right? But I asked
Hating our guts.
Yeah, hating our guts, right? Saying, I'll never live here again. And now they come back and they expect you to love them and they expect you to do all this. And, you know, maybe they got their life straightened out. Some of them go in the military. Some of them have been successful, even be able to work. And the reason why he says that, he says, well, what they do is that their neutrons or their electrodes or whatever it is in their brain, their connection of the brain, because it's not fully developed up here. He said what happens is they're 18, 16 years old and they're having all these behaviors and stuff. And when you see them and they come back and they're 26 years old, it's fully developed. And he says then what happens, their whole thought pattern, because it's all right here, he says they realize, and it has to do with being mature too, I'm sure. But he says that age, between 18 and 26, is most of your time when most of everything, like you're saying, because everything is not developed here yet until they're about 26.
That's when our kids appreciate us, no wonder.
Yeah. When they're 26 years old, maybe it's full blown right here. They're fully developed in the brain, you know? So,
Right, yes.
I wasn't aware of that.
Our brains are very sensitive at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, always, but especially at that time because it's still developing and everything, and any changes in lifestyle or even like body chemistry, if they get on a weird new medication that changes things in their body, that can also lead to a mental health crisis or
Right, absolutely.
what have you. So yeah,
A lot of times it's asking the right questions. All of a sudden you see changes.
yes, if you see changes, say
Especially when they left home.
right. It's very hard to, like I said earlier, the more symptoms they have, it may be harder to reach them. They just sometimes can't, they hear what you're saying, but they don't like take it to heart, if that makes sense. Because they just can't. So the earlier the better.
But if you ask some of them questions that you were talking about, sometimes that offends them. They get aggravated because then they think you're being nosy.
Right.
We ought to be a nosy, that's our job. That's what
But then
parents
they
do.
think, they think you're being nosy and then they want to shut you off because now you're getting in their business.
Right.
But you're trying to protect, save, intervene, but they don't look at it that way.
Right. And sometimes
So it makes it
takes,
difficult.
yes, it does make it very difficult, especially when you care about the person you know
Yes,
personally.
you love them and you know.
Yes.
That's the same situation that we have with our 18-year-olds, you know, they go along, we have them for 3 or 4 years, we get them when they're 13, junior high, whatever, they get 18 years old, and you can't never talk to them about their diagnosis because they don't believe they have a diagnosis.
Yeah.
And then you want to educate them so that they can go out and stay on medication, understand what's going on.
Okay, look, you're going to be graduating. You need this because of this. Oh no, and they somehow they think that you can't. It's not about, well, I'm 18, you can't tell me what to do anymore. It's more like they don't want to hear. They don't even think there's anything mentally wrong with
They
them.
think you're judging them.
Yeah.
Or you can be like my oldest son who was put on a medication and it completely lulled him to death. And then when he graduated, he got himself off of it and he could even hear better. Everything was clear. He came out from underneath a fog and it had been the wrong medication for 4 or 5 years. He kept saying, I need to sue that doctor because really it robbed him of several years. But it was Geodon. It was a mood stabilizer.
Right.
And it really robbed him of 5 years of his life.
Yeah, you have to pay attention to those medications because that same exact medication can help and improve the lives of so many other people, but it might not be right for their body.
Absolutely.
It just, we're all so different, and you have to explore those medications, which takes time and resources, insurance and everything covering all that. It's a process. It's a
And
frustrating
psychiatry is
process.
really a new